Wyoming Territory, September 1881. The wind screamed through the high plains like it was trying to tear the world apart, and Priscilla Jennings held her coat tighter across her swollen belly as she walked, one boot slipping in the mud. Her dress clung to her legs, soaked through from the rain, her bonnet long gone, ripped away by the storm an hour back and never seen again. Thunder cracked overhead, booming so loud her teeth rattled. She kept walking. She did not look back at the road. There was nothing behind her worth seeing. Priscilla was 7 months pregnant, and she was alone. Her husband, Samuel, had died 4 months ago. A broken neck from a fall off a half-wild horse he was too proud to give up on. She buried him herself under a cottonwood tree on the edge of their land, then listened for weeks as the bank sent notice after notice. The land had not been his. It had been borrowed, like everything else in their short marriage. The final letter came 3 days ago. She had 2 days to leave. So she packed what little she could carry, folded the worn blankets Samuel's mother had made for the baby, and began walking west. Where exactly, she did not know. Just away. The storm had rolled in by sundown. The sky went black and the wind turned cold. Lightning forked across the sky like it was hunting her. Her boots squelched in the wet dirt, feet aching, legs trembling. Every step felt heavier than the last. Just as she thought her legs might give out, a light appeared up ahead, a flicker steady, not lightning, a lantern. She blinked hard, forcing her steps forward. Her hand cradled her belly. She whispered, "Almost there, baby, just a little more." The barn appeared first, then the outline of a house, both tucked into a rise of land protected by a few thick pines. The house was small but solid, smoke curling from the chimney. She stumbled toward the porch, nearly falling up the steps. Her hand was closing around the door latch when it opened from the inside. He stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long duster and holding a rifle. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, but the light from the lantern behind him caught his eyes. "Jesus," he said, voice low and rough with surprise. Please," she managed. "I just need to rest. I am not here to steal from you. I am just tired." The wind howled again, almost picking her off her feet. The man stepped forward, catching her by the elbow before she could fall. His palm was warm and sure. He looked down at her belly, then back up at her face. "You're pregnant," he said. "I am a widow," she answered. "And I will leave in the morning." "No," he said gently. "You are coming inside. Now." She opened her mouth to argue, but he had already slid his arm around her back and was guiding her through the door. The warmth hit her like a wave and her knees buckled. He caught her again without effort. "Easy," he said. "You are safe now." The fire crackled in the hearth. She looked around the little cabin. It was clean, simple, a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fire, a bed in the corner neatly made. She tried to stand straighter, but her legs quivered. "Sit," he said, guiding her to the chair by the fire. "I will get you dry things." She watched him cross the room. He moved like someone used to living alone, quiet and efficient. He came back with a folded flannel shirt and a thick wool blanket. "I am not trying to be improper," he said. "But you should get out of those wet clothes or you will freeze." She hesitated, but the way he stood, one arm extended, eyes steady and respectful, made her believe him. "I am Priscilla Jennings," she said softly. He nodded. "Nathaniel Hart." Priscilla took the shirt and blanket and stepped behind the screen near the bed. Her fingers trembled as she peeled off her wet dress. The baby kicked once, then stilled. When she came out, wearing the oversized shirt and wrapped in the blanket, he had already hung her dress by the fire to dry and was stirring something in a pot over the flames. "Stew," he said. "Not much, but it is warm." He handed her a bowl, and she sat quietly on the edge of the rocking chair, spooning the stew into her mouth. She could not remember when she had last eaten something hot. Nathaniel sat across from her, watching the fire. "You should not have been out there," he said after a while. "I had nowhere else to go." There was a long pause. The wind beat against the shutters. "My wife died 2 winters ago." "Fever," he said. "No children." She looked over at him. His face was strong, sun-browned, with a quiet sadness in his eyes. He glanced at her belly again. "I am not asking for anything," she said quickly. "I will be gone by morning." "No," he said again, firmer this time, "you will stay here. At least until the storm passes." She was too tired to argue. She nodded once and he stood. "You take the bed," he said. "I will sleep by the fire." "I do not want to put you out. You are not." He hesitated, then added, "No one should be alone in a storm like this. Especially not you." She lay in his bed that night, curled on her side, the baby shifting softly inside her. The firelight flickered on the ceiling. She listened to the wind, to the storm, and to the quiet sound of Nathaniel breathing steady in the chair by the hearth. She whispered a thank you into the dark. She did not expect him to hear, but he did. "You are welcome," he said softly. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The sky was pale and clear, the land washed clean. Priscilla stood on the porch, Nathaniel beside her. She clutched the blanket around her shoulders. He handed her a tin cup of coffee. "You are welcome to stay longer," he said. "I have the room, and you should not be alone." She looked up at him. His eyes were steady, kind, no pity in them. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." The wind stirred her hair. The world felt quiet after the night's fury. Then, softly, he said, "Stay." She looked into his eyes. She saw no expectations, no pressure, just a man offering warmth, safety, maybe something more. Her heart beat once hard. She nodded. "I will stay." He smiled, just a little. And for the first time in months, so did she. The morning after the storm, Nathaniel hitched his mule to the small plow and set to the frost-hardened soil behind the house. The air was thin and brittle, and his breath drifted white in front of him. He worked with quiet focus, boots sinking into the soft earth, the reins looped loosely in one hand. Each turn of the blade unearthed the scent of damp loam and old roots. Priscilla stood at the window, one hand resting lightly on her belly. She watched him a while without moving, her other hand curled around a tin cup of warm milk. The blanket he'd given her was folded across the foot of the bed now, and she wore a dress she'd found tucked inside a cedar chest beneath the window plain cotton, a little faded at the seams, but dry and sound. It had belonged to his late wife, though he hadn't said so. He hadn't needed to. When he came in near midday, boots muddy and hands roughened from the rains, she was at the table with a pan of peeled apples. "You shouldn't be standing so long," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth hung by the door. "They were going soft," she answered. "I thought I'd make a pie." His brow lifted slightly, not in disapproval, more like surprise, quiet and unspoken. "You've lived alone a long time," she added, eyes steady on his. He nodded once. "Long enough to forget what a kitchen ought to smell like." She looked back down at the knife in her hands. "I don't bake often," she admitted, "but my mother used to. I remember how she'd hum while she worked. I can't seem to remember the tunes." He stepped beside her, reached for the sack of flour in the corner, and set it gently on the table with a low thump. "What kind of pie?" "Apple cinnamon, if the spices haven't gone bitter." "They haven't." She glanced at him, and something passed between them, familiarity, still new but not uncomfortable. Nathaniel reached for a jug near the hearth and poured water into a basin. "There's a root cellar out back," he said after a moment. "If you need anything more, tell me, I can fetch it." "I'll manage," she said, then softened. "But thank you." After the pie was in the oven, she stepped outside to the porch and sat on the wooden bench he'd built from split pine. The hills rolled outward in every direction, gold-tinged now that the storm had passed, the grass bent from the weight of the rain. A hawk circled high above, silent and slow. Nathaniel joined her, arms resting on his knees. They sat like that for a while, saying nothing. The warmth of the pie drifted through the open windows behind them, mingling with the scent of damp earth and pine pitch. "Where were you headed?" he asked finally, not looking at her. "I didn't know," she said. "I just kept walking. Thought maybe I'd find work in Rawlins, but I never made it that far," he nodded. "You'd have had a hard time of it." "I know." She turned toward him. "You said your wife passed 2 winters ago." He gave a slow nod. "Her name was Clara. She was quiet." Stronger than me in most ways. Priscilla was silent for a moment. I used to envy women who could stay quiet and still be heard. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. A breeze lifted a strand of her hair and she tucked it behind her ear, gaze still on the hills. "You were heard last night," he said. "You knocked, I listened." She looked at him then and he met her eyes. Neither of them smiled, but something in her chest softened. The oven door creaked behind them and she rose to check on the pie. Nathaniel followed her inside, watching as she pulled the pan free with a folded cloth. The crust was golden, the filling bubbling gently at the edges. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You cook like someone who hasn't forgotten how to build something from not much. I had to learn early. You said your husband Samuel," she nodded. "You miss him." "I miss the parts of him that were kind. I miss believing things would settle." She placed the pie on the table. "But I don't miss the silence between us. It got wide toward the end and neither of us knew how to cross it." Nathaniel said nothing, just watched the steam curl up from the crust. She met his eyes. "You don't talk to fill space." "No," he said. "I talk when something's worth saying." She considered that, then cut 2 pieces and placed them on chipped ceramic plates. They ate standing up, the crust flaking warm beneath their forks. "It's good," he said after the second bite. "Better than I remember." She leaned her hip against the table, watching him. "I didn't know if I could still make something right." This time he looked at her and didn't look away. "You did." The afternoon passed in slow, quiet tasks. She mended a tear in one of her stockings with a needle and thread she found in a drawer near the stove. Nathaniel repaired a cracked fence post, hammering with measured strikes that echoed across the land. That evening, she lit the oil lamp while he brought in a load of firewood. The light threw soft shadows across the walls, gentle and gold. She laid the baby's blanket across the foot of the bed and sat beside it, hand resting lightly on her belly. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, watching her quietly. "Would it be too much," he said, voice low, "to say I hope you stay longer than the storm?" She turned toward him, eyes steady. "That depends," she said. "Is this a place someone like me can begin again?" He stepped inside, the door shutting behind him with a quiet click. "If you want it to be." The first frost came 2 mornings later, silvering the tall grass behind the barn and whitening the porch rail. Nathaniel had already been out since before light, splitting what remained of the pine logs stacked along the side of the house. Priscilla woke to the sound of the axe, a rhythmic, measured sound that never rushed. She sat up slow, rubbing a hand across her ribs where the baby had pressed hard through the night. The quilt she'd used was heavier than she was used to, stitched through with thick wool batting and patched in places with old cotton. She folded it neatly and set it aside, then dressed in silence, lacing her boots carefully before stepping outside. Nathaniel looked up from the woodpile as her boots thudded onto the frost-damp porch. "I thought I might walk a little," she said, pulling the shawl tighter over her shoulders. "My back's been stiff." He leaned the axe against the chopping stump. "There's a creek just past the cottonwoods. It's shallow this time of year. You'll want to step careful over the roots." "I'll be all right," she said. "I've learned to mind my feet." Nathaniel didn't follow her, but his gaze lingered until she disappeared beyond the trees. The trail was narrow, winding down gently through bramble and brush. Her boots slid a little on the frozen leaves, and she steadied herself with a hand on a low-hanging branch. When she reached the creek, she knelt slowly and dipped her fingers into the water. It was cold and clear, the stones beneath it dulled smooth from years of current. She sat a while on a flat rock, letting the quiet soak into her. A jay called overhead, and somewhere far off an elk bugled once, low and distant. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what life might look like here in a month or 2 or 10. Her breath puffed in front of her and the baby stirred with a slow roll. By the time she returned to the house, Nathaniel had gone inside. She found him at the table, using a whetstone to smooth the edge of a carving knife. "You didn't have to wait breakfast," she said. "I didn't," he said. "But there's coffee left." She poured herself a cup and sat across from him. I saw the edge of your line fence near the creek, she said. It's leaning south, he nodded. Elk pushed through last spring. I haven't had time to fix it. She sipped her coffee. I could help. I'm not useless just because I'm carrying. I never said you were, she raised an eyebrow. You didn't have to. Nathaniel looked up, a half-smile playing at the edge of his mouth, not mockery, just the trace of someone unused to being challenged. You're not what I expected, he said. Most people don't expect much of women traveling alone. I meant you carry things quiet, but you don't let them bury you. She set her cup down with a light clink. I've been buried before. I climbed out. I won't go back under. He looked at her for a long while. The knife sat still in his hand. You're welcome to stay through the winter. I'll clear out the pantry room. It's got a stove pipe and a window. You'd have privacy? I don't want to be a guest for long, she said. If I stay, I'll work. I'd ask nothing less. The light shifted through the window, casting a long stripe across the table. Outside, a gust of wind stirred the brittle grass. They sat in the quiet, the air between them no longer uncertain. That afternoon, she helped him sort the tools in the shed. He handed her a bundle of wire, and she found a place for it along the back wall, organizing the shelves by hand. When he crouched to retrieve a pry bar from beneath the bench, she noticed the way his shoulders moved broad and steady, as if the weight of years had shaped him without breaking him. He stood, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. Do you want to stay in the pantry room tonight? No, she said. Not yet. He didn't press. That night she sat in the rocker by the fire, her feet tucked beneath the hem of her skirt. Nathaniel sat on the floor nearby, oiling the hinges of a cupboard door he'd brought in to mend. I had a sister once, she said after a long moment. Ellen. She drowned when we were girls, fell through the ice on the river near our farm. He paused, the rag still in his hand, and looked up at her. My father blamed my mother for letting us go alone. My mother blamed herself. I never forgave the river. Nathaniel didn't ask questions, he just waited. She was the only person who knew how to make me laugh when I was angry. I haven't laughed like that since. I reckon she'd want you to. She looked at him, the firelight catching the lines around her eyes. You don't speak much. But when you do, it's not wasted. He stood and placed the door near the wall. I learned young that words can hurt worse than fists, so I use them careful, she nodded. You ever want children? He hesitated, then sat in the rocking chair opposite hers. I did once. Then I thought maybe the chance had passed me. She didn't answer right away. The fire crackled between them. This child is coming whether I'm ready or not, she said, but I want to raise him somewhere quiet. Somewhere where he's not born into sorrow. Nathaniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. This land is hard, but it's clean. You'd have that here. She met his gaze. You say that like you mean for me to stay longer than the winter. I do, he said. The words hung there, not rushed, not heavy, just true. She looked away, but not to hide, just to let them settle. Then she nodded once. I think I'd like that. The days shortened. Sunlight came late and left early, brushing the tops of the hills in pale gold before slipping behind them without ceremony. Priscilla measured the days by the way the shadows stretched across the cabin floor, by the sharp bite in the air when she first stepped outside, and by the quiet rhythm of Nathaniel's movements through the land he knew by heart. She had not asked to stay past winter, but she had not said she would leave either. They'd fallen into something steady, not arrangement, not kinship, not yet affection spoken aloud, but something that made the hours easier to bear. Nathaniel brought in a cedar cradle one morning, the wood still raw and smelling of resin. He'd built it in the loft above the barn, where his tools waited like old friends. He set it near the window without a word. Priscilla traced the curve of the rail with her fingers. You made this, he nodded once, adjusting the angle so it wouldn't catch the draft from the door. It's good work, she said. My father taught me joinery, said a man should know how to leave something behind worth touching. She stared at the cradle a long time. Samuel never built anything that didn't hold water or wheat. Nathaniel didn't respond, just waited with his weight shifted back on one boot heel. She turned toward him. You think it will be a boy? I don't know, he said. But I figured strong would suits either. That afternoon, she sorted through the chest he'd cleared from the pantry room. Among the old linens and stored candles, she found 3 carved buttons in the bottom corner. They were mismatched, worn smooth at the edges, likely from a shirt too far gone to keep. She pocketed them without thinking why. Later, as the wind picked up and the fire settled into its evening hush, she brought out the wool swaddling she'd started sewing. She took one of the buttons and stitched it onto the hem, small and simple. Nathaniel watched from the hearth, elbows resting on his knees. "You always sew in silence." "I listen better that way," she said. He nodded, then looked toward the window. "There's been sign of wolves near the far ridge. I'll ride out tomorrow to check the fence line. Might be a day or two." She set the needle down. "You ride alone." "Always have." She stood slowly, crossing to where he sat. "If something happened to you, no one would know. No one would come looking." "I don't expect anyone to." She folded her arms across her belly. "That isn't what I asked." Their eyes met, and neither looked away. "I'll leave word with old Ruthie at the trading post," he said. "If I'm not back by the 3rd day, she'll send someone." Priscilla exhaled softly. "Good." He stood then, taller than her by a head, and for a moment neither of them moved. "I'll be careful," he said. "I believe you," she replied. That night she lay awake longer than usual, listening to the wind push against the walls. Nathaniel had gone to the barn to bed the mule and hadn't returned right away. She kept her eyes on the ceiling, her hand resting on the rounded curve of her stomach. When he came in, smelling of hay and leather, he paused at the door. "Couldn't find the lantern," he said. "It's there on the peg," she said. "Behind your coat." He stepped into view and hung his hat on the hook. She didn't ask what had kept him. Some silences didn't need breaking. The next morning, he saddled the mule with quiet efficiency. She stood on the porch, shawl drawn close, watching him strap the bedroll behind the cantle. He adjusted the cinch, then turned to her. "There's dried meat in the cupboard," he said. "And the well's holding steady." "I know what to do," she said. His eyes lingered on her face. "Don't go to the creek." "I won't." He nodded once, then swung into the saddle. She watched him ride south, the mule's hooves muffled by the frost-stiff grass. 2 nights passed. On the 3rd morning, she stood at the edge of the yard with her hands buried in her sleeves. A hawk circled high above, slow and wide. She watched until it drifted out of sight. By late afternoon, the mule crested the hill, dark against the pale light. Her throat tightened, though she didn't move until he reached the gate. Nathaniel dismounted stiffly, his coat dusted with snow. A scrape marked his cheek, and one sleeve was torn near the elbow. "You're late," she said. "Had to mend the upper fence." He led the mule into the barn. Wolf got tangled in the wire, took some doing to clear it. She stepped inside the barn after him, the air warm with animal breath and straw. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. I'll be the judge of that." He looked at her then, shadows under his eyes. "You were right. It's not good to ride alone." She reached for his arm gently. "Sit, I'll clean it." He obeyed without protest. She brought water and a strip of clean cloth. As she dabbed the wound, he watched her face. "You worried?" he asked. "Yes," she said plainly. His voice dropped low. "I've lived a long time without anyone waiting on me." "You won't have to anymore," she said. "If you stay." He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply reached up and cupped her hand where it hovered near his jaw. "I want to." The barn was quiet but for the mule's soft shifting. The cold crept around the doorframe, but neither of them felt it. She stood still, his hand warm on hers. "Then you will," she said. And he did. The first snow came soft and early, brushing the tops of the fence posts and catching in the corners of the windows like sifted flour. Priscilla stood at the kitchen table, knitting a cap with coarse gray yarn Nathaniel had bartered for from the Shoshone woman who passed through twice a year. Her hands moved with purpose, slow but sure, the way they did now with most things. Nathaniel came in carrying a haunch of venison wrapped in burlap, his boots leaving wet prints across the floor. He set it on the table and pulled his gloves off, flexing his fingers before hanging his coat near the stove. His eyes found hers and lingered. You're quiet, she said, not looking up from her stitching. He pulled a chair out and sat, his hands resting loose on his thighs. Saw wagon tracks this morning, shallow, headed west. She tucked the ball of yarn beneath her elbow. Who'd be traveling now? Could be a trapper heading to Fort Washakie, could be someone lost. She didn't ask if he planned to follow the tracks. She already knew he wouldn't leave her now, not with the child due any day. Instead, she said, I dreamt of a river last night, not one I've seen. It had ash trees along the bank and a bend full of black stones. The baby was in my arms and I didn't feel afraid. He watched her carefully. You believe in what dreams tell you. I believe in the ones that make you feel something after you wake. Nathaniel leaned forward, elbows on the table. You ever think about naming him? I have, she said, but I'd rather wait till I see his face. The kettle began to hiss, and she moved to pour water into 2 cups. He accepted his without comment, wrapping his hands around the tin as though to keep the cold at bay. I've been clearing the loft, he said after a while. Thought it might make a fine place to store grain come spring. She sat across from him, drawing her shawl tighter. You still think that far ahead? I do now. Her lips curved, but not in a smile, more like something settling in her chest. They spent the rest of the day in quiet work. Nathaniel salted the venison and hung it in the smokehouse while Priscilla scrubbed the hearth and laid a new braid of kindling beneath the iron pot. The wind rose by evening, rattling the eaves, but the house held firm. She woke before dawn, a cramp low and sharp in her belly. She didn't cry out. She gripped the bedpost and breathed through it, counting to 10 beneath her breath. Nathaniel stirred from the chair near the fire where he'd taken to sleeping most nights. Is it time? He asked, already on his feet. She nodded, jaw tight. It's coming. He built the fire higher while she paced, one hand on her back, the other braced against the wall. He laid blankets near the stove, boiled water, and brought the cedar cradle close enough for her to see but not worry over. When the sun broke, pale and dull behind the clouds, she was on her knees, breath ragged, sweat damp in her hair. Nathaniel stayed close, but not too close. He passed her herbs steeped in warm water, held her shoulders when the pain caught her by the spine, and never once looked away. The child came just after noon, red-faced and squalling, his fists curled tight as seeds. Priscilla held him against her chest, rocking gently on her heels while the fire popped behind them. Nathaniel knelt beside her, one hand resting near the baby's back. He's strong, she looked down at the boy, then up at him. He looks like Samuel in the brow, but the rest he's all his own. You have a name? He asked, voice low. She nodded. Elias. Nathaniel repeated it under his breath like a promise. That night, while Elias slept bundled in a wool wrap near the fire, Priscilla sat beside Nathaniel on the porch bench, a quilt over both their knees. The air was sharp, but the stars were out, clear and bright above the pines. I never planned to stay here, she said. I didn't plan much of anything beyond surviving. He shifted closer, his shoulder brushing hers. I didn't plan to want anything again. She turned her head toward him. And now, I want this, he said. You, Elias, the land, a life with more than silence in it. She reached for his hand. He took it, warm and calloused. They sat like that until the cold pushed them back inside where the fire was still burning steady. Months passed. Elias grew strong, his cries louder, his eyes bright and quick. Nathaniel carved him a rattle from ash wood, and Priscilla stitched him a bonnet from scraps of old muslin. The snow melted in slow patches and the ground grew soft again. They planted potatoes, then beans, then squash, working side by side in the tilled rows behind the house. The world greened quietly around them. One morning in May, Nathaniel stood at the edge of the porch, watching the sun lift over the ridge. Priscilla came up beside him, Elias dozing in her arms. I never asked you, he said, if you'd marry me. She met his eyes. You didn't have to, he stepped closer. But I want to say it plain, I love you, I want to build the rest of my days with you. Will you be my wife? She smiled then, full and open, the kind that reached her eyes. Yes, Nathaniel. I will. They married beneath the cottonwood tree behind the barn, just as it leafed out in green. Old Ruthie came down from the post with a tin of preserves, and the Shoshone woman brought a bundle of herbs wrapped in buffalo hide. Nathaniel wore a clean shirt, and Priscilla wore the dress she'd mended by hand. Elias gurgled through the vows, cradled in a borrowed basket. By summer, the house had changed. A second cradle lay tucked in the corner, this one waiting. Priscilla's belly curved beneath her apron, and Nathaniel split wood with a steady whistle under his breath. They read each other's silences like scripture, knew when to speak and when to hold still. The land was not easier, but it was no longer hard in the same way. It was theirs now, weathered, worked, and quiet. Together they built something lasting, not from what they had lost, but from what they chose to keep. And in the years that followed, through storms and harvests, through the laughter of children and the ache of old scars, they remained. A family. Rooted whole.